Now, during the last session, we were working on some of the basic design for this web application, the home page specifically. And just to recap, we're going to have navigation at the very top where this black strip is. Here we're going to have maybe a logo, name of the site, maybe a little slogan down here. Over here we'll have a box that if you're not logged in, it'll give you a login form with the username and password, and otherwise it'll probably just say welcome and then your name, and maybe have some links to check your account information. Here there will be a space for clicking on if you are someone looking to be hired, and here there will be a space to click on if you are looking to hire someone for a project. And then down here there will be another navigation area with things like about us, contact us, things like that, and then a copyright message down on the bottom. Okay, so what I want to do next is make it so that the content of each of these sections is dynamically obtained based on the name of the class of the div tag in question. So here's how we're going to do that. So first of all, if we look at the CSS, let's see. Okay, now we have navbar, we have container, header, login box, left choice, right choice, bottom nav, copyright. All right, so let's start with copyright. If we can make it work for copyright, we can make it work for everything else. So let's go ahead and open up the actual HTML here. Okay. Well, let's do this. Now, let's open up the PHP. Okay. So I notice we have $this show content and create content. I'm probably going to want to have another function here that will change the placeholders like this into the content that I desire. So we're going to want a function that looks something like this. Something on those lines. So it will find the placeholder called copyright and it'll change it to that. I definitely want to put this assign placeholder function in the parent class here because I can see many pages using that function. So let me go ahead and open that up. There we go. So I can see here $this content is going to contain the actual content. So if I'm going to be changing the content via that assign operation, it'll work like this. And that should actually do the trick. So we should see if this worked by going back to the home page and seeing if we have the copyright message. We don't, so obviously something went wrong. Let's see if we can figure out what. Let's view the source code so that we can see. Okay. Ah, that was the issue. I forgot the braces. That's easy enough to fix. Okay, so back to the PHP. And what I want to do is make it so the function expects braces. So it'll work like this. There we go. Good. And there's my copyright message. All right, so the next thing here is I want the content to be obtained from a file. Now for a little copyright message, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it will make sense for larger sections of content. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. All right. So I have my templates directory, which has pages. I'm trying to think of the best way that I could do this. One thing that I could do is I could actually have a subdirectory for each page name, and that subdirectory could contain content files for each element of the content. And because I can change it later, and this is something where I'm experimenting, why not? Let's go ahead and do that. So we have the pages directory here. Let's create a new directory called subpages. And no, I don't like that idea actually. I think a better idea would be to have the name of the page and then maybe well, copyright, for example. Copyright could be on multiple pages. Any of these div tags could be on multiple pages. So maybe the best approach is just to have each div tag gets a unique name. And we'll just create one called div content, and inside of div content is where we can go ahead and do that. So for example, I can create copyright and .html. Okay. Now back to the PHP. Now I don't need this new content to be sent anymore because I want it to obtain it. So it's going to obtain it and that should do the trick. All right, let's see if that worked. And there it is. So now whatever is in the file under div content slash whatever the placeholder is, it'll get replaced with that. So now we can be a little bit more creative here. We can, no, I should have taken this out completely so that it's only sending the one parameter here. Good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the next bit of div content here, and just for right now we'll do the nav bar. So going back over here to the homepage.html, here's our copyright div tag, and now here's our nav bar. So again, we're going to just put in nav bar. Alright, so how do we create content for this? Well, we're going to need to do two things. First of all, the PHP is going to need to assign the content for the nav bar. And second of all, there's going to need to be the actual page here. Like so. Whoops, that was funny. Alright, that should be all I need to do here. And you can see it worked. Now the content for the nav bar is right there. Alright, so the next thing that would be kind of nice to have here is the CSS for each of these div tags could be part of its own file as well. The idea here is that each thing that we're going to be building, each div tag, will be trivial to construct in the end. We'll have a file for its CSS, we'll have a file for its HTML, and we'll know exactly where to go for each one. So let's take a look again at the HTML here. Now right now we have a single CSS file. That's fine. Let's go ahead and open it. Alright, and here is the navbar CSS. So what if we did this instead? Let's go ahead and go down here to templates and make a directory called div CSS. These names are entirely subject to change later on. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all of this and I'm going to write it to the file /navbar.css. And then I'm going to replace this with navbar. Now the goal here is that the PHP is going to find this text navbar and replace it with the actual CSS for that particular tag. The reason that splitting it up is going to help us later is because we're actually going to have functions that will create entire chunks of content. One PHP function will create the navbar, will create the copyright section, and those PHP functions will know where the CSS is, where the HTML is, because of the names of the files. So that's part of the idea here. It'll become more apparent later on as well. Let's see, right, so templates. There we go. Okay. So what we need to do is make it so that the PHP that is responsible for displaying the style.css page actually works, and I can get out of this one. Yeah, the PHP code is actually going to construct the whole thing. When we're done with this, we'll be able to be in a PHP file, and we'll have something kind of like this. Just if we imagine this is sometime in the future, we might have something like some class create page copyright, and it will figure out where to put the CSS, where to put the HTML, where to put the JavaScript, everything related to the fact that this particular page has the copyright div tag. But it'll get better than that. You see, what we'll actually have in the end is we're going to have each page defined in a way that we simply say that it contains certain things. So we're going to say page divs. Let's see, how do I want to explain this? Let's see. And this function, for example, would in the end create a page, a completely working page that has a copyright, the nav bar, the left choice, the right choice, and so on. And it will even be able to arrange them in the order in which we want. So we'll be able to construct pages very rapidly, and new content will be nothing more than just a matter of having a function that will copy some existing content into an empty template that we can open up and then load it up. So with development like this, you get exponential results. Right now we're having to spend X amount of time making one page. Okay, but now we have a function that makes one page. Now future pages will be much quicker. That's the idea here. That's still a little bit into the future, but that's my thought process. That's where I'm leaning towards. So now what we need to do is make it so that the file that is responsible for CSS, which is class.css.php, is going to do this. Okay, so I don't like the fact that we have this if statement inside of this init function. This is more along the lines of what create content should do. But we also have these unique headers. I do think that the headers for right now, we'll keep the headers in this class, but I might later on move them to a different class. So I'm going to create a function for the headers, though. And here we go. Good. Now, the real purpose of this chunk of code here is to obtain the file name of the CSS file. So I should create a function called getFileName. And I'll put all of this into here. And do you notice how by doing this, you're making the code more readable, because you're taking chunks of code and you're defining what the purpose of it is, and then you're saying, okay, the idea of this code is it gets the file name, and then your comments reflect that. So the result is very readable code. Alright, now I don't like this echo $ file here. This should really be part of the function in the parent class called showContent. We have $this showContent, which specifically uses $this arrow content. So what this is really doing here, or what it really should be doing here, is setting this content equal to file get contents, and then we can just go ahead and call show content because it'll be created properly. So that's a little nicer. Let's see how this works right now and make sure I saved everything. Okay, good. Okay, so right now that's not working. That's fine. So why not? I might actually undo a little bit to go back in time here, just to see at what point it stopped working. Okay, it works there. Let's go forward a little bit in time. I do that with Control R in Vim to go forward, whereas U goes backwards. Okay, that tells me, so let's go back a little bit more. Forward one. Okay, so that's the point it stopped working. Now I can determine why. Well, let's go forward one more. Okay, it still works, so let's go forward again. Okay. Still works. Let's go forward again. And that's where it stops working. Okay, let's confirm that. So it works here. Okay. Now I know why it doesn't work, and I can go ahead and troubleshoot it better. So why is it this content? All right, for the fun of it, what if I just echo this content? Will that work? Yep, that works fine. So this show content isn't working. Now, here's my show content function. Ah, that's the thing right there. There's a flag of content exists, and it's only going to echo this content if it exists, if the flag is set. I think there's a better way that we can do this. We really are more interested in if the flag is set or if the content exists. There we go. That makes more sense. And now we can go ahead and do it the way we had it, and it should be fine. Yep, works fine. Okay, so the next thing is we have the function called create content. I want to reconcile these 2 bits of code. I want to reconcile this chunk of code here, which is effectively creating the content, and the function that's supposed to create the content. So I want to compare them side by side. So for right now, I'm just going to copy this chunk right in front of that chunk, just so that I can compare them side by side. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to clean up that code a little bit, because I don't like the fact that I don't have a $sign file name, which should be equal to this. Alright, so I want to change everything that is inside of these parentheses to be just $sign file name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type CI parentheses, which means change inner parentheses, and it will change everything inside of the parentheses. And here's how that works when I do that. So I'm anywhere inside that area, and I type CI parentheses $sign file name, and I'm done. Now the really cool thing about Vim is if I want to do the thing that I just did, all I have to do is push the period key. So with one key press, I just did it again. That makes it very easy to do the same sort of operation multiple times. All right, now here we have this placeholder changing operation. We'll leave that there for right now. What we're really interested here is that the difference between these two bits of code is that this one has /CSS in it, and this one has /pages in it. So this one is template /pages, and this one is /CSS and template /CSS. So what I want to do is make it so the create content understands to treat one situation differently than the other. So what I really need here is I need a test to determine if this is pages or it's CSS or it's something else. Now that's not too hard to do. I already have the code here that checks the URI for if it's CSS. So I'm just going to copy that to the top of this function. Okay, so this effectively means if this is a CSS file, or if a CSS file is being requested, then I want to do this. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and just do whatever it was doing before. There we go. Or more specifically, okay. Now there are some parts of this that are probably going to stay the same and some that aren't. Let's go ahead and move the code in and then we'll figure that out. All right, so this is what we're interested here. Okay, there we go. And we don't want to do the $ this show content because the purpose of this function is to create the content, not to show it. So I'm going to take out the show content line, and that should do the trick. If this is CSS, it now does what I want it to do. So now this create content is capable of handling CSS as well as the pages. Now I can take out all of this. One exception, I do want the exists file name. How do I want to do that? I want to set a flag here. Oh, actually I don't even have to worry about it because the show content already takes care of checking to see if it exists or not. So I can simply delete everything here except show content. And now get file name becomes irrelevant, so I can just take show content and put it here, and I no longer need that function, and now I have a very straightforward process. I show the headers and I show the content. Okay, so let's make sure it all works. It doesn't. That's fine. Let's figure out why. My guess is it has to do with show content. This won't take very long to troubleshoot. Just for the fun of it. Oh, I'm not getting any warnings on that. There might be a PHP error somewhere. Nope. All right, this is a great example of where we want to use logging. Okay. Make sure the logging function works properly. The log file is in /logs. Okay, good. Okay. There's my test. Okay, so I know that works fine. Right now, let's go ahead and see what's going on here. So now, briefly, here's why I'm really not going to want to use echo in this case, because the content here is being treated as CSS. And so I'm not going to really be able to see it necessarily just in the web browser, because the web browser might be parsing it as CSS and hiding it from me. So it's better to see it in the log file in this case. So I'm definitely interested in whether or not this particular bit of code executes. And it doesn't. Okay, that helps. So possibly this path is wrong because we're now in a different directory, because the general page, well, no, that shouldn't be a factor. All right, let's see if this chunk of code executes. Nope. Okay. That's interesting. All right, so let's go back over here. Oh, we never called create content, did we? Okay, now it executes, so we're getting closer. Now, okay, so what if we try displaying this? Okay, we're getting closer. Now the only thing that's wrong here is that the show content isn't working the way we want it to. And probably okay, the content is definitely being created. We can see that here. And then, oh, that's the problem. Okay, so here I'm setting $this arrow content equal to whatever $content happens to be. Here I'm setting $this content equal to what's in the file get content. So what I should really do here is this. That way content is set to that, and then way down here this content is set to that. Now let's see what happens. and it works. Okay. Perfect. All right, so that's a good place to stop for today. So I'll go ahead and open it up for questions and answers here after I exit all these files. All right, so if you have a question, just go ahead and type Q, and then once you've typed Q and enter, you can go ahead and type out your question. Okay, so regarding the question on why I am using absolute instead of relative, the answer is right now I'm working with a very fixed structure for the layout. Later on, I'm going to probably make it so that the page can stretch and fill different size, different size web browsers and things like that. But that comes later. Right now I want just a basic layout that works. Remember, the whole idea here is that when I'm done, it's going to be much more modular and it will be easier to create pages and content. Right now I have to edit everything manually, so I'm trying to keep it a little bit more rigid just to minimize how much work that I have to do. And on the subject of an autoloader, you're referring to autoloading classes, right? Yeah, there's a possibility we'll get into auto-loading classes, but definitely not at this phase. Remember, part of the idea here is I'm trying to keep this very beginner-friendly, at least as much as I can. So, but yeah, that's a good question. We'll get into that at some point. And then, all right. So, anyone else have any questions? If so, just go ahead and type Q and enter. Yeah, it's definitely experience. I mean, especially when something doesn't work. If you put the htaccess file there and you go to the URL and it doesn't work, there's a lot of things that could be wrong. The permissions of the htaccess file could be wrong. The mod rewrite module might not be installed. The configuration file inside of your /etc/apache2 might not say allow override properly. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong there. And yeah, experience has a lot to do with the speed at which I can troubleshoot things like that. You'll also find, though, that the more you practice it, the better you get and the less likely you are to run into those issues. What I recommend, just in general, anytime you have a technical task that you'll have to repeat, is write down the steps you took. That way, later on down the road, you can just reference your own personal notes and say, oh, this is how I set up htaccess. And eventually you won't need the notes, but until you do, it's good to have them. A great example of that is sometimes I have to set up some complex firewall rules where maybe just to connect one machine to another machine, I might need as many as 6 different rules, 6 different firewalls just to make, or 6 different firewall rules just to make one machine connect to the other. So I always write them down and go through them one by one, checking them off as I do, because it's so easy to think I did one and then not having done it, and then it's a horrible nightmare trying to figure out why the machines can't connect. Is it the firewall rule? Is something wrong with the machine? What is it? So it's always good to have a strict process to do something, to have that process written down, and to follow it. All right, so next question. Would you think understanding MVC theory side would be beneficial to understanding better how you structure things? I'm afraid I don't understand that question. Please rephrase that. Or I think what you're asking is, do I think that you understanding MVC theory makes it easier for you to understand what I'm doing? To a point. A lot of what I'm doing here is just my own creativity here. I'm not necessarily following some standard, this is how you build an MVC framework. A lot of this is I'm just kind of trying to come up with what I think will work well in the situation. And a lot of programming is creativity. You're basically faced with a problem, and you get to decide how you fix that problem, how you solve it. That's what I enjoy about programming. That's the challenge of it. It always keeps your mind going. So here I'm thinking, okay, my end goal here is I want to have these really cool functions that'll just create pages, and maybe I'm going to have something XML based where each page will have a bit of XML and then it'll automatically locate all the content it needs. And that, combined with the fact that I've built things like this before, leads me in the general direction of what I'm trying to create here. But it really is a creative process. The reason I choose XML over JSON for that specifically is because I want it to be easier to read for me. I want to be able to look at it and just see exactly how the page is constructed. It's harder to do that with JSON. Anyone else have any questions? If so, just go ahead and type Q and enter. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. Thank you everyone for coming, and I'm glad you're enjoying the session, and I will see everyone on Thursday because there won't be a session tomorrow because tomorrow is Wednesday. So I'll see everyone on Thursday, and thanks for coming and goodbye.